She sat at the back of the courtroom, mop in hand, as the trial unfolded. No one ever looked at her, just another invisible worker in a Navy uniform. But as the prosecutor tore apart the defendant's military record, something changed in her eyes. Staff Sergeant Caldwell wasn't who they claimed. She knew the truth about that night. She had been there. When the judge prepared to deliver his verdict, 5 quiet words escaped her lips. "I served with him." The courtroom froze. Then from the back row, an elderly man in a crisp suit rose to his feet. A general with secrets no one expected. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story resonates with you, please consider subscribing. We share stories of courage, redemption, and the quiet heroes who change lives when they finally speak up. Lizia Reeves moved through the gleaming marble hallways of the Bartlett County Courthouse with practiced efficiency. Her Navy maintenance uniform blended into the background of Power's suits and judicial robes. At 42, she had mastered the art of invisibility. Eyes down, movements economical, voice rarely heard. The courthouse vibrated with its usual rhythm. Lawyers rushing past with coffee-stained briefs, clerks shuttling paperwork, and families waiting anxiously on hard wooden benches. No one noticed Lizia as she emptied trash cans or wiped down water fountains. No one saw her pause occasionally to watch the proceedings through the courtroom doors. The morning light filtered through tall windows, casting long rectangles across the polished floor. Lizia checked her cart for supplies before starting her rounds. Paper towels, disinfectant spray, glass cleaner, fresh trash bags. The routine was comforting in its predictability. 7 years at this job had taught her every corner of the building, every schedule, every face that belonged and those that did not. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. A text from her son, "Ellen, don't forget I have debate practice after school. Home by 6. She smiled and typed back a quick response. Ellen was 16 now, tall and thoughtful with her same dark eyes, but his father's strong jaw. The same father who had walked out when Ellen was 4, unable to handle what he called the silence. The things she wouldn't talk about, the nightmares she wouldn't explain. Today, something changed. Courtroom 3 had been packed since morning. A high-profile case involving Staff Sergeant Emery Caldwell had drawn media attention. Lizia overheard fragments as she cleaned nearby. Disgraceful what he did, abandoning his post like that. They're making an example of him. That's what this is. Military's pushing for maximum sentencing. 10 years minimum. She slowed her movements, ears tuned to the conversation between 2 journalists leaning against the wall. I interviewed his wife yesterday, the younger one said, checking something on her phone. She swears he was following orders that night. The older journalist snorted. They all say that, but the prosecution has 3 witnesses saying otherwise. Lizia moved past them, her expression carefully neutral. When Judge Hargrove called for a lunch recess, she slipped into the empty courtroom to clean. She studied the defendant's table with unusual interest. A photograph sat among the legal pads. A military unit in desert fatigues posed before a helicopter. Her hand trembled slightly as she dusted around it. The prosecuting attorney returned early, barely acknowledging her presence. "Make sure you get under the tables," he said without looking up from his phone. "Someone spilled coffee this morning." Lizia nodded silently, but her eyes lingered on the photograph a moment too long. A familiar mountain range in the background, the unmistakable outline of a Chinook helicopter, and faces, some she could almost place if she allowed herself to remember. She moved away quickly, focusing on the coffee stain. The prosecutor, Jeff, was joined by a military officer in dress uniform. Their voices carried across the empty courtroom. "We've got this locked down," Jeff said, shuffling papers into his briefcase. "Frell's testimony will be the nail in the coffin." "Good," the officer replied. "The secretary wants this wrapped up cleanly. No loose ends." "What about the defense's request for the communications log?" "Denied on national security grounds." The officer's tone was flat. "Some things are better left buried." Lizia kept her head down, wiping the same spot on the floor repeatedly until they moved their conversation elsewhere. When they left, she stood up straight, feeling a familiar tension between her shoulder blades. The same tension she'd felt years ago when making decisions that could cost lives. That night, Lizia sat at her modest kitchen table with her laptop open. Ellen was doing homework in his room, music playing softly through his closed door. She typed Emery Caldwell trial into the search bar. Article after article appeared, most painting the same picture, a decorated soldier accused of abandoning his position during a critical mission, leading to casualties. One photograph caught her attention. Caldwell leaving the courthouse, head bowed, a woman holding his arm. Something about his posture spoke of dignity under pressure. She knew that stance. Zia closed the laptop and reached for the bottom drawer of the kitchen cabinet, the one she rarely opened. Inside was a small wooden box. Her fingers hesitated on the lid before opening it to reveal a folded American flag, a purple heart medal, and a faded ID card with her younger self staring back at her. Lieutenant Commander Zia Reeves, U.S. Navy. She closed the box quickly when she heard Elliot's door open. "Mom, you okay?" he asked, leaning against the door frame. His dark hair was getting too long, falling into his eyes. "Just tired," she said, smiling. "Busy day at the courthouse. Anything interesting?" She considered telling him about the trial, about why it bothered her, but the habit of silence was too ingrained. "Not really, just the usual." The next morning, Zia arrived at work 30 minutes early. She wanted to hear the opening statements. Slipping into courtroom 3, she took a seat in the last row, just another face in the growing crowd. Judge Hargrove entered, and the bailiff called the court to order. Caldwell was led in wearing a dark suit that hung slightly loose on his frame. He had the lean, hardened look of someone who had once been much stronger. Prosecutor Jeff rose for his opening statement, his voice ringing with practiced conviction. Staff Sergeant Emery Caldwell had one job on the night of May 14, 2019. One job: to maintain communication security at Position Alpha during Operation Sable Arrow. Instead, ladies and gentlemen, he abandoned his post during a critical 47-minute window. In those 47 minutes, insurgents breached the perimeter he was meant to be watching. 3 American soldiers were seriously injured. One nearly died, all because Caldwell wasn't where he was ordered to be. Fazia's fingers curled around the edge of the wooden bench. Her breathing remained steady, but something cold settled in her stomach. The defense attorney, Lourdes Mendoza, was young and earnest in her Navy suit. Her opening felt weak in comparison. Staff Sergeant Caldwell served his country with distinction for 14 years. On the night in question, he followed orders as he understood them. The prosecution cannot prove otherwise because Sergeant Caldwell did exactly what he was trained to do: respond to changing battlefield conditions as directed by his superiors. Day 2 of the trial brought technical experts explaining communication protocols and chain of command structures. Zia listened while polishing brass fixtures outside the courtroom, absorbing the testimony that filtered through the open doors. Day 3 of the trial, and tension filled courtroom 3. The prosecution presented their star witness, Major Dominic Frell, who testified about Caldwell's alleged abandonment of his post during Operation Sable Arrow, leaving fellow soldiers vulnerable to enemy fire. Staff Sergeant Caldwell received direct orders to maintain his position. Frell testified, his voice clear and certain. Instead, he disappeared for 47 minutes. When he returned, 3 soldiers had sustained injuries that could have been prevented by his presence. From her position near the back wall, Zia clutched her cleaning card until her knuckles whitened. Her face remained impassive, but something flickered in her eyes. She recognized Frell, younger in her memory, but unmistakable. He had been there, but not where he claimed, not where it mattered. Defense attorney Lourdes Mendoza struggled against the prosecution's narrative. Her cross-examination seemed ineffective against Frell's polished testimony. "Major Frell, where were you positioned during the time in question?" "At Command Post Bravo, approximately 2 kilometers from Caldwell's position." "So, you did not personally see Sergeant Caldwell leave his post?" "I received reports from ground teams and monitored the communications gap. His absence was well documented." Mendoza pressed further. "Did you attempt to reach Sergeant Caldwell during this time?" "Multiple attempts were made. He did not respond." In the gallery, several uniformed officers watched with stern expressions while reporters scribbled notes. Sia's chest tightened. She knew why Caldwell hadn't responded. She knew exactly where he had been. During the afternoon break, Zia cleaned the restrooms where she overheard 2 military officials speaking in lowered voices by the sinks. They fell silent when she entered, then resumed when they apparently decided she was of no consequence. "Caldwell should have taken the deal," the taller one said, adjusting his tie. "Doesn't matter. Pentagon wants this buried quickly." "What about the missing communications log?" The shorter officer sounded concerned. "Classified." Court will never see it. A pause. And neither will anyone else. Fazia kept her eyes on the paper towel dispenser she was refilling, her movements deliberate and unhurried. When they left, she leaned against the wall and closed her eyes briefly. The missing communications log. Of course, it was missing. It would have shown everything. Later, as testimony resumed, something unexpected happened. When Caldwell finally took the stand, the Zia stopped mopping. For the first time, she looked directly at his face. The years had etched lines around his eyes and mouth. His hair had grayed at the temples, but she recognized him now with absolute certainty. I followed orders, Caldwell insisted, his voice. I was instructed to relocate by someone with higher authority. And yet no record of such orders exists, the prosecutor responded smoothly. No one has corroborated your story. Caldwell's eyes scanned the courtroom, looking for someone, anyone who might remember. His gaze passed over the Zia without recognition. How could he recognize her? They had spoken only by radio that night, voice to voice in the darkness. In the back of the courtroom, Fazia's hand tightened around her mop handle. A barely perceptible scar along her jawline seemed more pronounced as she clenched her teeth. The scar was her souvenir from that night, the night everything changed. As the day ended, an elderly gentleman in civilian clothes, but with unmistakable military bearing, entered the courtroom. Retired General Atticus Blackwood took a seat in the back row. Fazia's eyes widened slightly in recognition. She had not seen him in person for 8 years, not since her medical discharge ceremony, where he had pinned the Purple Heart to her uniform and whispered, "Some battles can't be fought in the open. Lieutenant Commander, remember your oath." She had remembered. For 8 long years she had kept her silence, built a new life, raised her son alone. She had become invisible by choice, by necessity. But watching Caldwell on the stand, seeing the truth twisted, something shifted inside her. The weight of silence suddenly felt heavier than the risk of speaking. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table again, the wooden box opened before her. This time, she reached beneath the flag and meddled to the small flash drive taped to the bottom of the box. Insurance, she had called it when she created it. Protection, she had never intended to use it. Ellen found her there at dawn, still staring at the flash drive. "Mom, have you been up all night?" She looked up at her son, seeing the man he was becoming. "I have a difficult decision to make today." "About what?" He sat across from her, concern in his eyes. The Zia took a deep breath. "About who I am, who I've been. You're my mom. You're the courthouse cleaning lady who never misses my debate tournaments." He smiled, but his expression was confused. "Before that," she said quietly. "Before you." She told him then, not everything, but enough. About serving her country, about the classified operations, about the injury that had ended her career and brought her back to civilian life with instructions never to speak of certain things. She did not tell him about the night that haunted her, the night that Staff Sergeant Caldwell was now on trial for. When she finished, Ellen was silent for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and took her hand. "What are you going to do?" She looked at the flash drive. "What I should have done years ago." The final day of the trial arrived. Judge Hargrove, prepared to deliver his ruling after closing arguments that had painted Caldwell as a disgrace to his uniform. The prosecutor stood triumphantly as the defense seemed defeated. The Zia had arrived earlier than usual, wearing her maintenance uniform, but with something different about her bearing. She had left her cleaning cart in the supply closet. Today, she would not hide behind it. "Before I render judgment," Judge Hargrove announced, adjusting his glasses. "Does anyone else wish to address the court?" The courtroom remained silent. The Zia felt her heart hammering against her ribs. Her palms were damp. The moment stretched, each second an opportunity slipping away. She thought of Ellen's words that morning. "Do what you need to do, Mom. I'll be okay." Then, with a clarity that surprised even her, a soft voice spoke from the back. "I served with him." Heads turned. The Zia stood perfectly straight, her hands clasped before her to hide their trembling. "Excuse me." Judge Hargrove peered over his glasses. "I served with Staff Sergeant Caldwell." The Zia repeated, louder now. "My name is Lieutenant Commander the Zia Reeves, United States Navy Special Communications Unit. I was there during Operation Sable Arrow." The prosecutor jumped to his feet. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. This woman is a courthouse janitor." "I am a courthouse janitor," the Zia agreed, her voice gaining strength. "And before that, I was a naval communications specialist with top-secret clearance. On the night in question, I personally transmitted the orders to Staff Sergeant Caldwell to relocate his position. Those orders came directly from Command Central and were deliberately omitted from the official record. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Caldwell turned in his seat, staring at the Zia with dawning recognition in his eyes. Silence, Judge Hargrove ordered, pounding his gavel. Ma'am, if what you're saying is true, why are you just coming forward now? The Zia took a deep breath. Because I signed a non-disclosure agreement as part of my medical discharge. Because I have a son to support. Because speaking about classified operations carries penalties I couldn't afford to face. She paused. But I cannot watch an innocent man be convicted for following orders I personally relayed to him. The prosecutor was conferring urgently with his military advisors. Your Honor, we have no record of any Lieutenant Commander Reeves being involved in this operation. Check the hospital records from Camp Bastion on May 15, 2019. Thasia responded calmly. You'll find me there with a shrapnel wound to my jaw and neck. The same attack that injured the 3 soldiers Sergeant Caldwell is accused of abandoning. Before the prosecutor could respond, movement from the back of the courtroom drew all eyes. General Atticus Blackwood rose slowly to his feet, his weathered face solemn. Your Honor, he said, his voice commanding immediate attention. I request permission to approach the bench. The judge nodded, stunned. As Blackwood walked forward, he did something unexpected. He stopped before the Zia and rendered a perfect military salute. Lieutenant Commander Reeves was one of our finest communication specialists, he announced to the court, until she was injured during a classified operation and given an honorable discharge with the condition of complete silence about certain missions. The Zia returned the salute, muscle memory taking over despite the years that had passed. Blackwood turned to the judge. I was the commanding officer who issued those orders to Caldwell through Lieutenant Commander Reeves, and I'm here to set the record straight, regardless of what it costs me. From his briefcase, he produced a sealed file. This is the classified communications log that proves everything Caldwell has claimed. I've brought it at great personal risk because I cannot stand by and watch an innocent soldier be sacrificed to protect political careers. The prosecutor was on his feet again. General Blackwood is retired, Your Honor. He has no authority to declassify those documents. I'm well aware of my status, Counselor, Blackwood replied coolly. I'm also aware that this trial is based on a deliberate misrepresentation of facts. Facts I personally know because I gave the orders in question. Judge Hargrove looked between the general and the prosecutor, then at the Zia, still standing straight back in her janitor's uniform. This court will recess for 1 hour while I review this new information and determine how to proceed. As the courtroom cleared, the Zia found herself face-to-face with Emery Caldwell for the first time. You were the voice on the radio, he said quietly. Echo 7. The Zia nodded. That was my call sign. They told me you didn't exist. His voice was rough with emotion. That I had imagined the orders. I existed, the Zia replied. I still do. They were interrupted by a court officer asking them both to step into a conference room. The next hour passed in a blur of questions, documents, and phone calls to Washington. General Blackwood produced Thasia's service record, confirming her identity and role. The prosecutor received multiple calls on his cell phone, stepping out each time to speak in hushed tones. When court reconvened, the energy had shifted dramatically. The military officers who had been watching from the gallery were notably absent. The prosecutor's confident demeanor had evaporated. In light of new evidence, Judge Hargrove announced, the court will hear additional testimony from Lieutenant Commander Reeves and General Blackwood. The Zia was sworn in, the oath feeling familiar on her tongue despite the years since she had last spoken it. From the witness stand, she could see the entire courtroom, including Ellen, who had slipped in during the recess. He gave her a small nod of encouragement. Lieutenant Commander, please explain your role in Operation Sable Arrow, the defense attorney asked. The Zia spoke clearly, her training returning. I was stationed at the Central Communications Hub, coordinating between ground units and command. At 2,213 hours on May 14, 2019, I received direct orders from General Blackwood to instruct Sergeant Caldwell to relocate from Position Alpha to Position Delta. Why was he ordered to move? Intelligence had indicated a possible ambush at Alpha. We had intercepted communications suggesting the enemy knew our positions. The order was to quietly relocate key personnel without alerting the enemy that we had broken their communications code. And did you record these orders in the official log? No, the Zia admitted. I was instructed to use the secure channel that wasn't part of the standard record. This was common practice for sensitive tactical decisions that might compromise intelligence sources if documented. The prosecutor approached for cross-examination, his earlier confidence replaced by caution. Ms. Reeves, why should the court believe your account after 8 years of silence? Lieutenant Commander Reeves, she corrected gently. And you should believe me because I have nothing to gain and everything to lose by coming forward. My discharge benefits, my current employment, possibly even my freedom given the classified nature of what I'm revealing. You claim to have relayed orders to move Sergeant Caldwell from position Alpha. Why then were 3 soldiers injured at that very position? The Zia met his gaze steadily. Because the attack came earlier than intelligence predicted. Sergeant Caldwell had been ordered to move himself and the communications equipment. The other soldiers were scheduled to relocate in the second wave 10 minutes later. When the attack began, Sergeant Caldwell was already en route to Delta as ordered. And where were you during this attack? I had left the communications hub to physically deliver updated encryption codes to position Alpha. Standard procedure required hand delivery of new codes after any suspected communications breach. I arrived just as the attack began. That's how I received my injuries. The prosecutor's questions continued, attempting to find inconsistencies in her story. But Thasia's memory of that night was etched in perfect detail. It was the night that had changed everything. The night she had replayed in her mind countless times during sleepless hours. When General Blackwood took the stand, his testimony corroborated everything she had said. He explained the complicated politics behind the operation, how certain elements within military intelligence had pushed for a strategy he disagreed with. When the operation went sideways, there was immediate pressure to find a scapegoat. Blackwood testified. Sergeant Caldwell was convenient. A mid-level non-commissioned officer with no political connections. Blaming him protected careers and policies that should have been questioned. Why have you come forward now, General? The defense attorney asked. Blackwood looked directly at Caldwell. Because I've spent the last 3 years in retirement watching good soldiers take the fall for bad decisions made by people who never see the battlefield. I've attended funerals for young men and women who died following orders from people who later denied giving those orders. It stops here. After both testimonies, Judge Hargrove called the attorneys to the bench for a lengthy discussion. The prosecutor made several calls, speaking in hushed tones. When the judge finally addressed the court again, his expression was grave. In light of the testimony provided by Lieutenant Commander Reeves and General Blackwood, and after consultation with the Department of Defense, all charges against Staff Sergeant Emery Caldwell are dismissed with prejudice. The courtroom erupted in scattered applause and conversation. Caldwell's wife sobbed quietly, clutching his arm. The prosecutor gathered his papers without meeting anyone's eyes and quickly left the courtroom. The Zia felt a strange lightness as she stepped down from the witness stand. Ellen approached, wrapping his arms around her in a tight hug. I'm proud of you, Mom, he whispered. Over his shoulder, she saw General Blackwood watching them, his expression unreadable. When their eyes met, he gave her a slight nod before being surrounded by reporters. Outside the courthouse, the Zia stood in the sunlight, unsure of what came next. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her supervisor. Need to talk about your employment situation? Come to office. She expected as much. Security clearance was required for courthouse maintenance staff. Her revelation in court would likely cost her the position. As she contemplated this new uncertainty, Caldwell approached with his wife. Lieutenant Commander, he said formally, extending his hand. I don't know how to thank you. The Zia, she corrected, taking his hand. I'm not in the Navy anymore. You saved my life twice, he said. Once that night by warning us about the ambush, and again today. His wife embraced her, tears still flowing. Our children still have their father because of you. As they spoke, a black SUV pulled up to the courthouse steps. A man in a dark suit approached the Zia. Lieutenant Commander Reeves. I'm Agent Foster with the Department of Defense. General Blackwood asked me to give you this. He handed her an envelope. He also said to tell you that the Secretary of Defense would like to speak with you personally about what happened today. The Zia took the envelope, feeling its weight. Am I in trouble, Agent Foster? The man's expression softened slightly. Not according to the general. His exact words were, "Tell her the country needs more patriots like her, not fewer." As the agent walked away, the Zia opened the envelope. Inside was a letter on Department of Defense letterhead, officially rescinding her non-disclosure agreement regarding Operation Sable Arrow. Beneath it was a smaller note in Blackwood's precise handwriting. "Some silences protect the wrong people. Thank you for breaking yours. The secretary will call tomorrow about reinstatement of your benefits in a position more suited to your abilities. You've been invisible long enough, Lieutenant Commander." Ellen read the note over her shoulder. "Does this mean we're moving again?" Thea looked at her son, seeing the same resilience in him that had carried her through the darkest times. "I don't know yet, but whatever happens next, we'll decide together." For the first time in 8 years, the Zia felt visible. Not as a courthouse janitor, not as a single mother struggling to make ends meet, but as herself, Lieutenant Commander the Zia Reeves, who had finally completed the mission she began on that distant night in the desert. The mission of ensuring that truth prevailed. 3 weeks after the trial, a small ceremony took place at the Veterans Memorial Park. The morning air carried the scent of freshly cut grass and the promise of early summer. American flags snapped in the gentle breeze, creating a backdrop of red, white, and blue against the clear sky. Staff Sergeant Caldwell, now cleared of all charges, stood beside Lieutenant Commander the Zia Reeves as she received the reinstatement of her military honors previously withheld due to security concerns. The Zia stood straight in her formal Navy uniform, which felt both foreign and familiar against her skin after so many years in maintenance coveralls. The weight of the medals on her chest was nothing compared to the weight that had been lifted from her conscience. Her teenage son, Ellen, watched from the front row, his eyes never leaving his mother. He was seeing her, truly seeing her, perhaps for the first time. General Blackwood, despite facing his own investigation for releasing classified information, presided over the ceremony. His silver hair caught the sunlight as he addressed the small gathering of military personnel, journalists, and Phazia's courthouse colleagues who had come to support the woman they'd worked alongside for years without knowing her past. "We speak often of the cost of service," Blackwood began, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd, "but rarely of the cost of silence. Today, we honor someone who chose truth when silence would have been easier. Someone who reminded us all what serving alongside your brothers and sisters in arms truly means." As he pinned the bronze star back onto her uniform, the medal she had earned during Operation Sable Arrow, but which had been quietly removed from her record after her discharge, he spoke quietly for her ears alone. "They wanted me to court-martial you for breaking the non-disclosure agreement. I told them I'd resign my commission and go public with everything I know if they tried." His eyes crinkled at the corners. Sometimes the right thing isn't the easy thing, but it's always worth doing. After the ceremony, as the crowd began to disperse, Elon approached his mother with a mixture of pride and lingering confusion. "So, you're a hero," he said, touching the edge of one of her medals. All this time, the Zia shook her head. "Not a hero, just someone who finally did what I should have done years ago." "Is that why Dad left? Because you couldn't talk about what happened?" The question caught her off guard. Ellen rarely spoke about his father. "Partly," she admitted. "He wanted someone who could share everything. I couldn't be that person then. And now I'm just trying to figure out who I am when I'm not hiding anymore." Their conversation was interrupted by Caldwell, who approached with his family, his wife, and 2 children who appeared to be around Ellen's age. "Lieutenant Commander," he said formally, extending his hand. "The Zia," she corrected, taking his hand. "I'm not sure what I am anymore, but we don't need to stand on ceremony. You'll always be Lieutenant Commander to me," he replied with a smile. "The voice that saved my life." His wife stepped forward. "We want you to come to dinner, both of you," she added, nodding to Ellen. "We owe you so much more than a meal, but it's a place to start." As they exchanged contact information, the Zia noticed a group of officials in suits observing from a distance. The Department of Defense had been surprisingly accommodating in the aftermath of the trial, expediting the reinstatement of her benefits and offering to expunge any mention of the non-disclosure violations from her record. But she knew better than to believe their sudden generosity came without strings. Later, as they walked toward the parking lot, Caldwell asked the question she'd been expecting. "Why did you stay silent so long?" The Zia looked toward her son, then back to Caldwell. "For him, I needed stability, health insurance, something simple, and then it just became easier to be invisible. But you weren't invisible, Caldwell said. You saw everything, waiting for the moment when you were needed most. As they walked together toward the parking lot, Zia stood straighter, her janitor's uniform exchanged for civilian clothes that somehow looked more like her now. The weight of silence had lifted. In its place was something she hadn't felt in years. The certainty that she belonged. That evening, as Zia prepared dinner in their modest apartment, her phone rang with an unknown Washington, D.C. number. Lieutenant Commander Reeves, she answered, the title still feeling strange on her tongue after all these years. Good evening, Commander. This is Secretary Morales. I believe General Blackwood mentioned I might call. Zia nearly dropped the wooden spoon she was holding. The Secretary of Defense himself. Yes, sir. He mentioned it. I've reviewed your file and the circumstances surrounding Operation Sable Arrow. Quite a remarkable situation. His voice was measured professional. I'd like to discuss your future if you're open to that conversation. My future, sir. The department has a need for individuals with your particular combination of experience and integrity. People who understand both the necessity of classified operations and the importance of speaking truth when systems fail. I'm just a courthouse janitor now, Mr. Secretary. No, Lieutenant Commander, you were never just a janitor. That's precisely my point. By the time she hung up, Zia had the outlines of a new position, civilian oversight within the Department of Defense, focusing on accountability and ethics and classified operations. A role that would use both her military experience and her perspective as someone who had seen the system fail from the inside. Who was that? Ellen asked, entering the kitchen and grabbing an apple from the fruit bowl. A job offer, I think. She stirred the pasta sauce absently. In Washington, Ellen was quiet for a moment, considering, would we have to move? We, she repeated, feeling a rush of gratitude for her son's resilience. Yes, we would, but only if you're okay with it. You're almost finished with high school. I wouldn't want to disrupt that. Mom, he placed a hand on her shoulder. You've arranged your entire life around me for years. Maybe it's time I support what you need for a change. The following morning, Zia submitted her resignation to the courthouse maintenance department. Her supervisor, a kind woman named Greta, who had hired her 7 years earlier, seemed genuinely sad to see her go. Never had a more reliable employee, Greta said, signing the paperwork. Though I admit, I never pegged you for a Navy officer. That was kind of the point, Zia replied with a small smile. Well, whatever you're doing next, they're lucky to have you. Greta handed back the signed form. And Zia, for what it's worth, what you did in that courtroom, standing up like that, it took real courage. As she cleared out her small locker in the maintenance room, Zia found herself remembering her first day here, desperate for work after months of rejections, grateful for the steady paycheck and the anonymity. She had built a life in these quiet halls, watching justice unfold from the sidelines. There was dignity in that work, in keeping the system clean and functioning, even if no one noticed. 1 week later, Zia and Ellen drove to Washington for her first meeting at the Pentagon. As they approached the massive building, Ellen whistled low. So, this is where you'll be working. Pretty different from a mop closet. Very different, she agreed, feeling both excitement and apprehension. But the mission is the same in a way. Keeping things clean, making sure the system works the way it should. The security checkpoint was a stark reminder of her changed circumstances. After years of being virtually invisible, she now presented credentials that granted her access to one of the most secure buildings in the country. The guard examined her new ID card carefully. Welcome back to service, Lieutenant Commander Reeves. Inside, she was escorted to a conference room where General Blackwood waited with several high-ranking officials. Their expressions were serious but respectful. Lieutenant Commander, Blackwood said warmly, gesturing to an empty chair. Allow me to introduce you to the Ethics and Oversight Committee. You'll be working closely with them in your new role. As introductions were made, Zia recognized one of the officials, Major Frell, the prosecution's star witness from Caldwell's trial. His face registered shock at seeing her. Lieutenant Commander Reeves will be heading our new accountability division, Blackwood explained, ensuring that classified operations maintain proper documentation and that personnel are not scapegoated for strategic failures. With all due respect, General Frell began, his voice tight. Given Commander Reeves' recent actions regarding classified information. Given Commander Reeves' actions, Blackwood interrupted firmly. She has demonstrated exactly the kind of moral courage this department has been lacking. Sometimes loyalty to truth must supersede loyalty to protocol major. The meeting continued, outlining the parameters of her new position. The Zia spoke clearly and confidently, her years of military training returning as if they had never left. By the time the meeting concluded, even Frel seemed grudgingly impressed by her grasp of the issues they faced. Afterward, General Blackwood walked with her toward the exit where Ellen waited. "This won't be easy," he warned. "You'll face resistance from people who prefer the old way of doing things." "I'm aware, sir. And the irony isn't lost on me," he continued with a slight smile. "We're asking you to oversee classified operations while maintaining appropriate secrecy after you very publicly broke a non-disclosure agreement. The difference is context, sir. Some secrets protect operations and personnel. Others protect mistakes and misconduct. I understand the difference." As they approached Ellen, who was examining a display of military aircraft models with interest, Blackwood paused. "Your son seems like a fine young man." "He is," Tasia agreed. "He's handled all of this with remarkable grace." "Children often understand integrity better than adults do," Blackwood observed. "They haven't yet learned all the rationalizations we use to justify compromises." 2 months later, the Zia stood before a different kind of audience, a congressional committee reviewing accountability measures for classified military operations. Her testimony was measured and thoughtful, drawing on both her personal experience and her professional expertise. She spoke of the need for better systems, clearer chains of command, and protected channels for reporting concerns. "The goal is not to expose classified operations," she explained to the committee. "The goal is to ensure that when mistakes are made, we learn from them rather than conceal them, and that individual service members are not sacrificed to protect flawed policies." That evening, as she returned to the small house she and Ellen had rented in Arlington, she found him watching the news coverage of her testimony. "You look different up there," he observed as she set down her briefcase. "More like yourself somehow." "It feels that way," she admitted. "Like I've been holding my breath for 8 years and finally remembered how to breathe." The doorbell rang, and Ellen went to answer it. He returned with a package which the Zia opened to find a framed photograph of her old unit in Afghanistan. With it was a note from Staff Sergeant Caldwell. "Thought you might want this for your new office. A reminder that the truth always matters, even when it takes time to be heard. Our stories aren't over yet." The Zia placed the photograph on her mantel next to a newer one of Ellen at his debate championship. Past and present, side by side. She was no longer hiding one to protect the other. Later that night, as she prepared for bed, the Zia caught her reflection in the mirror. The scar along her jawline had faded over the years, but remained visible, a permanent reminder of that night in the desert. She traced it lightly with her fingertips, remembering the pain, the fear, the long recovery. But now, for the first time, the scar felt less like a wound and more like a badge of honor. It had shaped her certainly, but it no longer defined her. What defined her now were the choices she had made since then. Both the choice to stay silent for her son's sake and the choice to speak when an innocent man's future hung in the balance. She was no longer the invisible janitor moving through life unnoticed. Nor was she simply Lieutenant Commander Reeves, bound by orders and protocol. She was the Zia, mother, whistleblower, advocate, survivor, visible at last in all her complexity.